Chapter 291. Pestering Skeletons. When Sweeper shattered, the bones from its lower body spread across the root-covered floor and disappeared. Jay squinted, watching thoughtfully. If the floor here is collecting bones, maybe it can spawn over here, too. But then, why are there no over here in the first place? Did no one ever make it through the passageway? He wondered. Blue pulled Sweeper's body from under the white claw-like stone, having to snap away some of its spine, as it pulled out its upper body. Sweeper wrapped its arms wrapped around Blue's neck, yet even after the attack, it still gripped its sword firmly. Jay smiled a little as he watched Blue wearing Sweeper like a backpack. They both rushed back, getting further away from the giant root tendril, which rose into the air once more. The white pointed stone, which was embedded into the ground, moved again as the living root floor slowly pulled it back to the tentacle structure. Reloading. It won't be long before it attacks again, Jay thought. But how will I get close enough to kill the giant head, or to even analyze it? I don't want to deal with damn giant tentacles as well. He shook his head. Jay continued to walk towards the portal while he waited for Blue to bring Sweeper back. Meanwhile, Handy and Lamp had made it to the portal. The portal was, thankfully, at the very edge of the room, and made to look as if it were part of the wall. Far away from any swatting tentacles. The origin of this chapter's debut can be traced N0V3 liters B1N. It was about 3 times as tall as Jay, and the root that continually pumped the milky white fluid blocked half of it. Jay paused for a moment and watched the head as he gave direct orders to Handy and Lamp. Cutting open the root. Jay's eyes remained fixed on the head, while the skeletons brought their swords down, creating gashes in the large root. Still, it didn't move. It didn't even blink. Jay wasn't even sure if it could. He had not stared at it for this long, but its eyes seemed glazed over and its mind absent, as if it had been daydreaming for a millennium. Seeing no response, Jay safely continued towards the portal. Blue brought Sweeper's upper body back, and Jay fed bones to it as they walked. Blue had the humble duty of holding Sweeper's body until its legs regrew. The thunder of rushing knights continued overhead, while the sounds of clashing steel echoed from the passage. Jay ignored them as he kept track of the crushing white stone, which was creeping back to the tentacle carried along by the root floor. I wonder how far it can throw that thing, he thought, hoping he was out of its range. Perhaps it won't throw it near the edge of the room. The roots here seemed too small to retrieve it again. The tentacle was about 260 feet, 80 meters, from the head, and probably not long enough to reach the other side, meaning skeletons could attack the head from the unguarded side, but Jay was not counting on it being the only one that the giant head could summon as defense. By the time Jay made it to the portal, Sweeper was back to being whole, so he sent it, along with Blue, back towards the head. This time, their task was simple. Run frantically around the head and cause all the tentacles to spring up and reveal themselves. Practically, they were looking for gaps in the defense. The tentacle had since reclaimed its white capstone, but had not launched it at them, even while the skeletons chopped away at the portal root. These giant tentacles were only for defense, or perhaps the head cared little for the milk liquid root. Jay stood near the portal, seeing his vague reflection in its shimmering surface, though he decided not to go through to the other side, not until it was secure. Red, go through and secure the other side. Kill whatever needs to be killed. I'll be there shortly. Use your head. Jay kept Lamp and Handy chopping away as he waited at the side. Of course, he kept a distance in case the root was under high pressure. He didn't want to die the same way the knight outside the stone doors did. So far, progress was slow, as the root was much larger, older, and thicker than all the others they had come across. With Red exploring the other side of the portal, Blue and Handy pestering around the giant head, all Jay could do was wait. From the passageway, one armor-clad figure appeared. Huh? Jay raised a brow, barely spotting it from the other side of the room. The knight had burst out at the edge of the room, rolling first before getting to his feet. One got through. I thought I would have longer. Damn. Jay pursed his lips. The knight didn't even have a sword with it. Behind it, a wall of green and gray colors had all been mixed, a mass of ova and knights. There were so many knights pushing their way through the passage, it was simply an overflow. The ova were being buried in a sea of knights, which was only growing bigger as they all charged into the meat grinder. Oddly, the knight ignored the ova behind it and turned, running towards Jay at the very back right of the room. Seems like they have strict kill orders. Jay guessed. It was already clear that this knight wasn't one of the intelligent ones. The knight charged, without weapon and without reason. It was going to pass right by the giant tentacle. Well, I guess I have a moment to spectate. Jay's lips curled. The tentacle, sensing something drawing near, swayed slightly from side to side as it prepared for the approaching enemy. The knight charged into the trap without realizing, into range of the tentacle. Perhaps the tentacle was simply too still for the knight to notice, or maybe the giant head and its fleshy root tentacles were off limits for the knights. They relied on it for the green fluids, after all. Either way, it didn't matter. The tentacle was already falling. It was too late. Boom. The tentacle slammed down with full force. It hit even harder this time, making up for the attacks it had missed previously. Green blood splattered everywhere, some from the tentacle, some from the floor, and some from the crushed knight. After a few moments, the tentacle moved back, pulling itself back into its attack position. Jay, curious as he was, climbed onto the root to see the sorry state of the knight. Damn, he shook his head. Embedded into the roots, the tentacle had completely flattened its armor, leaving it sitting in a pool of the green fluid. It had crushed everything to oblivion. Yet the tentacle was not finished. Ah fuck, not again. Jay grimaced slightly. Boom. He took no pleasure in seeing the squished guts of the corpse being splattered to pieces even further. With a sigh, he turned away, checking on Blue and Sweeper. Each of them had just made it back near the head, and another tentacle root raised up in response. However, before it could fully form, they were already gone, running out of its range and making their way around the outside of the head. Hopefully, I won't have to fight one of those tentacles, though I already see a few easy ways to bring them down. Jay thought. He didn't want to waste time and effort, but having an attack plan would not do any harm. Turning back to Lamp and Handy, they had carved a deep gash into the pulsing root, and the plant's flesh turned more damp. They were close to cutting it open. Now let's see what the head does once we cut off its precious white liquid. Chapter 292. Adept Killers. Red had been in the portal for a long time, though there was no experience notification of a killing, and no death notifications of the skeleton. It made Jay curious, but he stopped himself from poking his head through. For all he knew, the other side could be filled with poisonous gases, or something there had encased the skeleton in ice. Trapped and helpless, unable to move, unable to die. Without knowing what was on the other side, Jay would not so much as breath near the portal, let alone stick his hand through. I wonder if my host ability would even work through a portal. I can't even sense red anymore, he thought, watching the shimmering silvery surface. Lamp and Handy finally cut open the root, while Jay watched from a safe distance. However, his caution was for nothing. The deep gash they made didn't erupt in a deadly high-pressure jet, but it slowly seeped out. Whatever the fluid was, it was thick, viscous and sticky. Globs of it slowly pumped out, though most still went through, towards the head. Maybe they would cut through it faster with their own weapons, Jay thought. Climbing onto the root, Jay temporarily let them stop cutting and formed a small pile of bones. None of the floor roots could hope to steal these bones up here, and the skeletons forged their own specialized weapons without worry. In the meantime, Jay analyzed the cut they made. He drew his hand near the milky white fluid, his finger outstretched, but ultimately, he decided not to touch it. Not worth the risk. It could be vitality for the head, but poison for me. Besides, I don't want that sticky shit on my fingers. He nodded. After a moment, Lamp and Handy finished crafting their weapons. A shepherd's crook, a gut knife, and a two-handed sword. But before Lamp and Handy could make a wider, deeper cut, more knights appeared, sprawling over the blockade of Ova. All lesser knights. Looks like the intelligent knights are sending them all in first, Jay thought. 5 of them made it past the Ova, 2 without weapons, lost in the desperate scramble of bodies. Again, they charged directly towards Jay. Jay shook his head. What is an army without a commander? Boom. Merciless as it was, the root caught them. It crushed 2 knights, turning them into a disgusting paste between metal plates. It knocked backwards a third, sending a knight falling to its back. The tentacle reeled back, preparing for another attack. The knights didn't turn to attack the tentacle and kept their focus on Jay. Boom. The knight knocked backwards became the next victim. An easy target, as it had slowed down considerably. Before the tentacle could strike again, the remaining 2 knights escaped from its range. This time, the tentacle didn't hurl its large claw-like stone. Lamp, Handy. Defend me, Jay ordered, still casually watching the foolish knights. The skeletons jumped down from the root, readying their newly crafted weapons. By now, the skeletons are used to fighting knights, and slaying 2 of them is a simple task, especially since one knight didn't even have a weapon. However, their tactics were quite different. Lamp charged directly at one knight, while the knight charged back, probably hoping its heavy weight would send the skeleton flying into pieces. At the last moment, right before they collided, Lamp dashing to the side, dodging the knight's charge. The shepherd's crook hung out to the side, wrapping around the knight's neck. Lamp put all its weight on it, and for a moment, Lamp was airborne, swinging around its neck on the shepherd's crook. Completely nullifying the knight's charge, its head sharply pulled back. Standing right behind it, Lamp was in the perfect position. A gap under the helmet appeared, the throat presented itself, but Lamp pierced its gut knife through the lower spine, killing the parasite within and ending the knight. 115 X. Lamp was nimble and efficient, but Handy's strategy was much more simple, and even elegant. Handy braced itself, slightly crouching in a lowered position while holding its two-handed sword pointing forwards, towards the stomach of the knight. The knight charged recklessly at the immobile skeleton, probably hoping to crush it, too. As it met Handy, the knight pulled its arm back to swing its sword low, attempting to slap the two-handed sword away. Yet at the last moment, Handy lunged forwards. In one fast movement, the two-handed sword raised from pointing at its stomach and shot upwards towards the knight's throat. Ding! The sword found the slightest gap in the armor and pierced through the throat, making a low ringing noise as it clashed against the armor behind the spine. 115 X. It died before a sword descended. The knight's sword swept harmlessly behind the skeleton, not dealing any damage. The knight fell on Handy, but after a shoulder bash, it dropped to the side. For a second, it stunned Jay to see how quickly the skeletons slayed them. After fighting in the gatehouse, the skeletons had become adept knight killers. I wonder if they can share fighting tips with each other, he wondered. The skeletons returned to Jay's side to defend him. For a moment, the three of them stood there. Jay was not expecting them to slay enemies that quickly, so had no new orders for them. Blue and Sweeper had run around most of the head, revealing a circle of the giant tentacle-like roots. 8 of them in total stood tall, arranged in a hexagon shape, all having their own white claw-like stones, all capable of being launched like trebuchets. Unfortunately, there were no gaps in its defense, and Jay recalled Blue and Sweeper, while giving new orders to the other skeletons. Lamp and Handy. Head through the portal and assist Red. Blue, Sweeper. Defend me for the time being. The 4 skeletons switched their jobs around as Lamp and Handy disappeared into a shimmer of silver. Jay stood atop the root and watched how everything was playing out. More knights were making it past the Ova blockade. It was hard to tell if they were making progress on killing the Ova, or if they had simply buried them, but apparently it didn't matter. It won't be long till the trickle turns to a river, Jay thought. Hopefully, they can follow me through the portal, but I should make sure it's safe first. Red, come back, Jay ordered, jumping down off the root. Jay then walked about 130 feet, 40 meters, away from the portal, and dumped Bones in a line. He laid down a semicircle barricade of bones, hemming himself in from every side, but after a moment they disappeared, and in their place, a ring of ova appeared. Seems like my guess was correct. The ova can grow here. All of the ovas stood within reaching distance of one another, and there were about 3 rows of them, creating a wall of needle-clawed guards. The only way the knights were getting past would be by much sacrifice and bloodshed. I'm a talented gardener. Jay smiled, watching his work unfold. Sure, he was trapped inside, but it not a prison. Though there was one part that caused some concern. At the edge of the room, where the roots met the wall, the ova were sparse. Only one ova was at the edge of the chamber wall, causing a weak point in the defensive half-circle around the portal. It will only be a problem once the intelligent knights come through, Jay thought. The barrier formed just in time as 8 knights rushed over, followed by 10 more, which just fell through. They all rushed towards Jay, ignoring the fearsome flesh-root tentacle. Despite the sheer number of knights, it didn't make Jay worry at all, as his defenses took advantage of the dungeon itself, and he could easily dump more bones. The ova he would soon kill were, for now, his personal army. Blue and Sweeper stood by Jay's side throughout the process, and Jay was glad to see that he didn't need to order them to not mindlessly attack the surrounding ova. Now where the hell is Red? Jay wondered. Maybe my order didn't go through the portal. He scratched his chin, or maybe it's trapped. Chapter 293 Obviously Mana. In a starving crucible of hungry villagers, under an ancient castle filled with parasites and an insipid plant creature, a battle raged in the very depths of a research labyrinth. Armor thundered and steel smashed as all alike funneled into a passage filled with the vile ova. Poisonous and near unkillable, the decaying knights crushed them underneath, but still the Ova fought back, attacking with whatever parts of them could still move. The rusted armor blocked most of their attacks, but not all. It was a tiresome battle, but as long as at least one knight died, the armor would rust and fall apart. They would claim the body parts and would have the last victory. In the Grand Chamber, with a small army of Ova surrounding him, Jay was safe. Behind him, a silver portal crackled with unfathomable energy, distorting the surrounding air. Nearby, a giant flesh root had pumped, each pulse like a ticking clock, counting down to Jay's death. Yet to this moment, it had not even moved. And while Jay was safe, it also trapped him here. He could not guarantee his safety on the other side of the portal. The only other escape option. To climb onto the giant milky sap-carrying root and run along it, though even that was not much of an option. The tentacles waited near the head, along with a sea of knights about to break into the room. For now, he could only hope that whatever Red, Lamp and Handy were doing on the other side of the portal would help, and that they were not stuck there. Jay watched as more of the knights charged to their deaths, and now, just as many were being killed by the tentacle, as by the ring of Ova around him. With some spare time, checked his quest, wondering how all of this related. Yet at the top of his notifications was another one waiting for him. One he received before but ignored and had since forgotten about. Level up level 13. Lock dungeon time dilation of 110 until dungeon is completed. You may not leave until the dungeon is completed. Dungeon quest. Save the innocent. Requirements. Level 15 or below. Innocent. Unsaved. Rewards. Level up. First clear reward. Passive skill. Temporary item acquired. Needle of the Starved. Level 13. Finally. I knew I was close. Now, I want more skeletons, but I also want them to reach level 5 and fully realize the benefits of their roles. Jay nodded, hoping to see what Blue would become. He made a quick choice as he already planned what to do with his skill and attribute points. Besides, the dungeon quest also promised another level up as a reward, so there were plenty more points coming. I'll have gained 2 levels by the time I leave this place, reaching level 14, and Azra will still think I'm a level 4 guy named Bob. He thought with a chuckle. She will probably think I simply left to take a piss. Maybe she'll still be asleep by the time I get back. He smiled, then paused for a moment. Am I looking forward to seeing her? He shook his head. Jay's thoughts about Azra were changing. She was becoming more like a beacon of hope than a source of laughter, even though he still felt nothing for her, and she undoubtedly felt nothing for him. Jay added a skill point into his undead mastery ability. As for the 5 attribute points, he dumped them all into his energy statistic, which gave mana and stamina, mana being something he constantly found to be his weakness. However, as he raised it from 45 to 50, another notification greeted him. Energy stat evolving. Choose your path. Stamina, mana, energy. Warning. You cannot undo your choice. You will still get base mana and stamina each level, but cannot increase them directly unless you choose it as your path, or remain neutral with the energy path. Permanent, but not a hard choice. The only time I have needed stamina was when I traveled, but even then, I could just make the skeletons carry me. Obviously, mana. Jay thought, locking in his choice immediately. Chosen path. Mana. Evolving stat. Energy mana. Mana. Grants mana regeneration and increases mana capacity. Oh, fuck yes. Jay grinned, seeing the bonus regeneration. Before Jay checked his class, the helminth reformed and dropped from his neck, as it leveled up too. The helminth stared up at Jay and snapped its jaws a few times. Jay knew what it wanted. Standing on the center of the large root, he made a pile of bones for it, adding a sealed wolf spine too, just in case it would need another. With the bone worm taken care of, he could finally check his class, along with his new abilities. Necromancer level 13, pure. Race human. HP. 230 seconds. MP. 114 Strength. 20. Dexterity. 25. Vitality. 35. Mana. 5/5. Energy. 50/50. Locked. Exp. 252-36,000. Skills. Necromancy skills. Raise Lesser Undead, 1. Summon Bone Helmet. Shell Restoration, 1. Unstable Teeth, 2. Host, 1. Mind, 1. Mass Summoning. Undead Mastery, 4. Passive. Necrotic Sense, 1, passive. Scrimshaw, 3, passive. Soul Sense, 1, passive. Shift Living Blueprints Transplant Amputation. Uncaring Rip Pitiful Mortal. Other skills. Mana Regeneration, 5. Mark. Mana Sense, 1. Mental Coding, 1. Mana Membrane, 1, passive. Iskian Asklin, equipment. Dagger Proficiency, 1, passive. Poison Resist, 11%, passive equipment. Running, 2, passive. Stealth, 1, passive. Stress Response, passive. Sword Proficiency, 1, passive. Class Utility, passive. Research. Chimera Research, 31%. Immortality Research, 5%. Skull Shield Projector Research, 32%. Dreadmorn Turret Research, 22%. New skills. Mana Regeneration Level 5. Regenerate 5 mana per minute. Undead Mastery Level 4. Your undead can reach a max level of 5. Level up is permanent. Excellent. Jay nodded. Hopefully, the skeletons can get up to level 5 quickly. The regeneration is a pleasant bonus too. He then turned to the helminth, which was happily crunching down bones at his feet. Now, my precious bone parasite. Level 4 now, huh? Jay checked his stats, but only paid attention to the ones which changed. Bone helminth level 4. Type Undead, Parasite, Spellcaster. HP, 60/60ths. MP, 50/50ths. Skills. Sentinel Form. Natural Form. Spectral Bolt. 8 magic damage, necrotic. 20 bolt capacity. 1 bolt produced every 240 seconds. Cost 2 mana. Ensnare. Symbiotic, passive. Grave Visitor, passive. Grave Soil Miasma, passive. Awesome. More damage and more bolts, 20 should be enough for most fights. At least against enemies with bones, it will always be useful. He nodded. And having 60 more bonus health to protect me will go a long way. I pity whoever will try to strike me. Jay watched the bone worm eat for a while as it grew into a larger form. Its slender skull got slightly bulkier, with new bone plates forming on the sides. L1 Lagoon witnessed the first publication of this chapter on NEOV Euros LB1N. Its skeletal body got thicker, and new pieces of armor trailed down its back along either side of its spine. Hitting level 4, its length grew longer than Jay was tall, meaning it could protect more of Jay's body. Yet what stood out the most to Jay was its eyes. They seemed fiercer, full of hunger and life. He thought, though he saw loyal adoration whenever it gazed back up at him. Alright, now the quest, something doesn't seem right about it. You may not leave until the dungeon is completed. Dungeon quest. Save the innocent. Requirements. Level 15 or below. Innocent. Unsaved. Rewards. Level up. First clear reward. Passive skill. Temporary item acquired. Needle of the Starved. Requirements level 15 or below. What if I was level 20? Would I not get the quest? Then that means I can complete the dungeon without it. He scratched his chin and thought. But then the question becomes, how do I complete it without doing the quest? As for rewards, I get a level up for completing the quest, but a passive skill for completing the dungeon. Jay shook his head at himself. All along, I have been assuming that finishing the quest means completing the dungeon. Ah, the devil is in the details, but I bet killing the plant and the knights will accomplish both, at least, I hope. Jay turned back to the portal, glancing into the shimmering, silvery surface. It concerned Jay, as he did not know the situation or what the skeletons were doing on the other side, and a swarm of knights was about to break into the room. Where's Red? He frowned. Discord.ggRRPMP84 Agwal. Sorry, there are not many Discord links. I don't want the Discord being overwhelmed. You can also access it through the PATR3 on. Chapter 294. Control Chaos. Blue, Sweeper. Start cutting the root open again. Jay ordered. Next, he glanced down at his feet. The helminth had eaten its fill and was ready to rejoin him, but Jay noticed something else. The root looked different. Did it get less white? It seems faded. The slightest shade of gray. Jay thought, observing the milky sap. Are my eyes playing tricks? Maybe Red is doing something. But what? The helminth snapped its jaws, craving its master's attention. Alright, come up. Jay patted his chest. The bone worm sprang, shifting into its ghostly form, while its body folded back into an amulet around Jay's neck. Since the grew to level 4, there was more bone mass. It made a thicker chain with plated leaf-shaped segments. Nice. Jay nodded. Blue and Sweeper got to work, hacking away at the root, while more of the thick milky sap leaked out. Meanwhile, the stream of knights coming into the room became larger, crashing into Jay's barrier of unwilling ova. Yet this practice soon came to an abrupt end. Suddenly, the stream of knights stopped. The battlefield felt different. On the other side of the room, knights still made it over the barrier, but now they no longer charged mindlessly. It was immediately obvious what had happened. An intelligent one made it. Damn. The knights amassed, and did so much more quickly than before. They were attacking the ova and the passage and pulling more of their army through. With a little structure, their threat level increased. Now things will get interesting. Glancing back at the root, the chitin became larger, letting more of the thick sap through, flowing out in globs. It's not enough. It won't be enough. Jay shook his head. Suddenly, the first group of the knight army moved. Gone was the chaotic mess. They marched in formation. The large force marched towards Jay, yet they avoided the fearsome tentacles. Jay hopped down from the root, glancing at it once more. I'm sure it's less white maybe. He thought, so the skeletons are doing something. Maybe it's okay to go through the portal. The large force of knights charged into the barrier of ova, smashing against them. Alone, the knights were not a threat. They were level 4, while the ova were level 8, and would regenerate any damage after a small fight. But with so many slashing swords and crushing armor, the first of them fell, soon to be followed by more. The knights quickly dispatched the ova that rose again, who were only getting a few hits in before falling a second time. The intelligent knights focused the lessers onto one area of the ova. More knights fell than ova, but it didn't matter when there were so many of them. Back at the passage behind the first force of knights, another force gathered. A second wave would come soon. Jay moved to where the battle was the fiercest. Splashes of green blood and squirming parasites filled the air. He released extra lines of bones from the necrotic gauntlet, forming more rows of ova and reinforcing them. However, the second force of knights began marching. As they came to the first group, one of the intelligent knights met them. If Jay had to guess, it was relaying orders or information. Instead of charging right into the barrier of ova, they began walking towards the wall where the floor roots were at their thinnest. Fuck. I expected this, but it's still annoying. The ova at the wall were slightly more spread out, and only one reached the wall. A weak point in Jay's barrier. Jay dashed over before they could get there and released more bones from his gauntlet. The bones disappeared as the knights crashed against the ova. The new ova didn't rise fast enough. They needed time to sort through the bones and assemble. 4 knights slipped past and charged at Jay, though the weak point was quickly closed, and enough ova spawned to block any more from getting through. Blue, Sweeper. Jay called. The 4 knights charged at Jay, ignoring everything else as they picked up speed. Pulling out the Deathwalker shield, Jay dashed to the side, dodging the first 2. The 3rd and 4th brought their swords down. Clang. The shield blocked one hit. Jay's sword parried another. Suddenly, a knight's hand shot towards Jay's stomach. Fuck. It wasn't a fist. These were lesser knights. Jay could see an oozing hole in the knight's palm, leaking green fluids. There was no time to block it. Gritting his teeth, Jay stepped back to get out of range, but he lost his footing. The hand was about to plummet into his stomach and deposit its eggs and parasites. ERRR. Suddenly, an ethereal green body appeared, blocking the infested hand from touching Jay with a humming sound. The helminth parasite. Its head raised up, its eyes glowing with rage. Who would dare to strike its master? Boom. A necrotic bolt struck back useless against the knight's armor, unless it found a gap. The knight's arm was outstretched. An opening at the elbow joint appeared. The necrotic energy shot right into the gap and caused havoc inside. The parasite transformation already weakened the arm, and now the bones had turned to liquid. Pulled down by the Vambra's armor, its arm fell off as the semi-decayed flesh ripped away. Clang. Jay blocked another sword slash. The other knight was still active. Behind him, the other 2 had turned around. In seconds they would be at his back, their swords and infested hands both keen to taste his flesh. They surrounded Jay from all sides. The helminth could not block everything that was coming. The skeletons were still rushing over, but would not get there in time. Immediately, Jay sidestepped and crouched to the ground. A complete tactical disadvantage. A slash was about to land on his back. Another stab was about to puncture him. Iskian. Suddenly, a blast of air sent the knight's severed arm flying behind him. It slammed against the wall of the chamber and crushed some parasites with it. Jay slipped out of the circle of knights at a confusingly rapid speed. Before the knights could charge again, the skeletons arrived. Two of these lesser knights didn't even notice the undead creeping up on them. And it was their undoing. Skeletal blades pierced through their spines with keen precision. 230 X. Jay had used his enchanted boots to escape the fight, almost crashing into the barrier of Ova he made. If he went the other direction, he would have smashed his brains against the wall. Catching his breath, he stepped away from the vile vine creatures. Yet the two remaining knights had already charged. "You fucking idiots," he said, a hint of disdain in his voice. It was an effortless task to sidestep again. The two knights thundered past, unable to stop themselves. Both of them smashed into the wall of Ova. It caught them in a deadly embrace. The skeletons rushed over, speeding after them. "Stop," Jay ordered, wanting to finish them in his own way. The Ova mercilessly pierced their needle claws into the knights as they held them. The one with a severed arm had no hope, but the other pulled itself up. A few tendrils still clung to its armor, but before it could slash its sword and pull itself free, a heavy blow hit it in the back, sending it sprawling deeper into the clutches of the Ova. Jay had Spartan kicked it. After a desperate struggle, they both died. 230x. This creation is firmly rooted in the depths of NOV Euros LSZN. We won't last much longer, Jay thought, glancing around. It was controlled chaos. They wiped out a single row of Ova, while they had brought the first force of the knights down to about 20 members, yet a third group of reinforcements were already coming. "Sweeper, head into the portal, wait there for 15 seconds, and then come straight back," Jay ordered. So far, none of the skeletons had come back through the portal, and Jay could not communicate with them either, so it was necessary to give the second order to return. As for the portal, the only thing which changed was that the milky white fluid seemed a little darker, like it had been stained. "If I get to the other side, maybe we can shut down the portal and escape to wherever it leads. But I don't want to go in blind. It's up to Sweeper." Chapter 295. Portal. Sweeper disappeared into the portal, leaving a small ripple to trailing across the silvery surface, while Jay waited. Come on, Jay hoped it would be back while Blue waited by his side. Suddenly, the third wave of knights crashes into the Ova. "Hurry, Sweeper, fuck." The knights had so much momentum that a group made it through. "Shit," he thought, gripping his shield and sword tightly and got ready to fight. Without pause they descended on Jay, full of wrath as they readied their swords. The Helminth launched necrotic bolts, trying to hit more gaps of their rusted armor. Jay immediately released more bones from his necrotic gauntlet, but it was to slow down the charging knights, rather than to bring up more Ova. 15 knights in total came barreling towards him, and the first 3 slammed into Jay's shield. They pushed Jay back as he jumped back further. Blue helped to brace against them, holding its sword with both hands. "Fuck. Where are the fucking skeletons?" Jay grunted, stabbing past his shield into an enemy's throat. Jay backed up towards the portal as he shrugged off hits against his shield. He gave them hits back with just as much ferocity. Blue took down one knight, but took a few hits in return. 115x. When one knight fell, Jay took the gap in the enemy formation and plunged his sword deeper into a knight's neck. Finally, it shaved past the spine where the parasite lived. 115x. Yet when Jay pulled the sword back, its blood coated it in parasites. "Arg," he angrily grunted, throwing his sword down. Immediately he pulled another weapon from his inventory. A black weapon with a diamond-shaped spearhead appeared. With an angular, elegant design, it seemed to look down any who would question it. Knowing war spear, cursed. Unknown material. 16 damage, two-handed. 9 damage, single-handed. Curse weapon is weakened until the curse is removed. Curse 50% less damage when wielded by non-constructs. Curse lock skill. Curse lock skill. Blue, switch weapons with me, he called, before more knights could get closer. Jay took hold of Blue's sword while the skeleton grabbed the war spear, using it two-handed. As a construct, the skeleton gained the full 16 damage of the spear. Right as they swapped weapons, a sword descended on Jay. He bashed it away with his shield. The knight staggered back. Crunch. Suddenly the black spear broke right through its rusted armor, piercing through the chest. 115x. Fuck yeah. Jay nodded. Blue pulled the spear out cleanly, no blood clinging to the slender tip. 5 more knights came closer, yet Blue met them with a deadly sweeping swing. The tip of the spear whistled in the air. The large Helvetian spear cleaved deep gashes over 3 of their chest plates, splashing green parasite-filled blood everywhere. The rusted armor seemed almost like an offense to the black spear. The 3 knights didn't die, but became defenseless without their armor. The other 2 knights escaped the war spear, lunging towards Jay instead. Because of Blue's sweeping attack, a wave of the blood splashed towards Jay, too. The Deathwalker shield blocked most of it. But not all. Some landed on Jay's arm. Shit. Come on. He couldn't lower his guard to wipe away the wriggling parasites clinging to his flesh. Each of them felt the warmth of his skin, and stung Jay as they bit into him. Jay jumped back, raising his sword high against himself. I'll fucking do it. He was about to sever his own arm. Suddenly, a wave of pain traveled through Jay's mind. A warning. Since the Mushroom Desert, there were already another group of parasites living in his arm. They would not let him sever them off. Grr. Fuck. He grit his teeth. Suddenly, the parasites stopped trying to burrow into his flesh. They curled up and harmlessly fell off. Dead. Huh. Clang. A sword strike landed on Jay's shield. He parried a second strike, but it did not focus his mind on the battle. The Ova poison. That's where the Ova poison landed on me, he thought. It was the only thing that made any sense. So their poison kills the parasites, too. Good to know. Jay parried another sword slash and dodged another. Meanwhile, Blue had slain 2 more with his heavy war spear. 115 X. 115 X. Suddenly, Sweeper came back through the portal. Fuck. Finally. Jay shook his head. Sweeper immediately sprang to Jay's side, killing 1 knight with its back turned. 115 X. 2 more knights joined the fight, but with Sweeper and Blue here, Jay had some breathing room. Further behind them, Fresh Ova raised, stopping 5 other knights after they absorbed the bone barrier. Blue killed another knight while Sweeper grappled with 2. 115 X. Of the 15 that made it past the Ova barrier, only 3 knights remained. Nothing the 2 skeletons couldn't handle. 345 X. Jay watched Sweeper, checking its bones. Apart from green dots and splashes of night blood, they seemed fine. Seems like the portal is safe, Jay thought. Sweeper's timing was nothing short of perfect as another row of Ova broke down. The knights surged forward, and another group pushed through. Just about time I left. But first, a gift, Jay thought. A torrent of bones spewed from his gauntlet. A hill of skeletons piled up as high as the pumping root. This should bring their numbers down a bit. Jay smiled slyly and turned to the portal. Blue. My spear, Jay ordered, deciding to store the war spear away in his inventory. It was a powerful gift from Sedulus. After all, N0v3 Realm was the platform where this chapter was initially revealed on N0v3LB1N. The parasite-covered bone sword that Jay dropped had disappeared into the roots, so Blue grabbed some bones and forged its own sword, while the 3 of them stood behind the gigantic pile of bones, which was already getting smaller, as the roots claimed them, too. Meanwhile, most of the floor near the portal was getting covered with a sticky white sap. They were already standing in it. The knights charged over, darting around the pile of bones. However, Jay already decided to leave. See ya, bitches. He smiled, pushing his hand towards the portal. His hand touched the silvery surface, but it didn't go through it. It pushed against it. It seemed to stretch around his hand, not letting him through. Wait, huh? He pushed harder. It was like the silvery fluid became stretched. What the fuck? Why not? You mean this is it? How come the skeletons can go through? As Jay held his hand there, the portal became slightly smaller. The crackling energy around its outside seemed to calm down and shrink. Fuck. He growled, pulling his hand back, glancing at his palm. The knights behind were still charging. Boom. Jay released an unstable tooth, slowing them down from the explosion, if only for a moment. Ova formed slowly, but many knights rushed over as they needed more time. Stress response active. Jay thought of a few options to buy some time. Release bones, resummon skeletons, but for now he readied his sword and shield. Until the Ova rise, I'll just have to fight. Chapter 296. Pitch Black. Shring. Blood spattered on the ground. Jay pulled his sword out of a knight's corpse, flicking off as much of the parasites as he could. Huff huff huff, he panted, exhaustion setting in. Blue, watch your left side, he quickly ordered. Jay commanded while fending off another knight. He was standing over Sweeper, who was slowly being resummoned. CLING. Arg, he parried a stray sword coming towards his neck, deflecting it to instead cut his shoulder. Stepping forward with a front kick, he pushed the knight back into a patch of ova. Jay, Blue and Sweeper fought efficiently, holding their ground while Red, Lamp and Handy did something on the other side of the portal, which was slowly turning the milky white fluid gray. To protect himself from the parasites, Jay used an ova corpse to coat any of his exposed flesh with its poison, while the molotov coat helped to kill many more of them. The knights had driven them into a corner, between the wall and the root. As the ova around them fell, they were running out of time. Jay had released more bones during some sticky parts of the battle, and caused additional groups of ova to form. As well as that, there was also a large group of them near the portal. While the ova were rising, Jay found a little trick to stopping them from rising directly under him. If he attacked them enough before they fully formed, the roots would retreat, taking the bones with them and forming somewhere else, while the milky sap leaking from the root seemed to discourage the ova from rising too. It was odd, as Jay thought that the sap would empower them. Thankfully, it helped him to maintain a small area which they kept clear to fight in. So far, they had fought back 50 knights, killing them or pushing them into the ova, and the knight corpses were piling up. The root floor stopped removing them, as there were probably too many corpses to deal with. More knights advanced closer. Blue fought 3, while Sweeper had 2. The skeletons fought aggressively. They had to take damage to deal it, otherwise more knights would pile up and overwhelm them. Jay held 2 off but fought more conservatively, saving his health, and the health of his helmet. The knight had broken the original barrier of ova apart, leaving it in tatters. Few of them remained. Every moment, more knights surged towards them. However, Jay kept his mind focused, not giving in to panic. We're going to be overrun at any moment. I'll need to retreat to the other side of the route. Yet as he took a few cuts and stab wounds, his patience was wearing thin. Where the fuck are they? I need more skeletons. He glanced at the portal. It still periodically rippled as the root pumped itself, but that was when Jay noticed something else had changed. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via Nevelbin. Pushing back another knight with his shield, he paused. Apart from the sounds of battle, the room was silent. The air was still, no longer waving backwards and forwards. The giant head had stopped pumping. Jay glanced at the head. His eyes seemed different. Its pupils they're moving, he thought, seeing them trying to focus on something. Another knight lunged towards Jay, stopping him from observing the head any longer. Ugh, bastard, Jay grunted, raising his shield and absorbing the blow. Suddenly, the ground tremored and shifted, knocking them both off balance. I staggered Jay, while the knight fell backwards into the ova. The head. He thought and looked over at it. Did it just blink? Suddenly, the ground shook again as the head tilted to the side. The sounds of battle suddenly stopped. All the knights paused and watched. Suddenly, one of the intelligent parasites raised a sword, pointing it towards the head. It's waking up. Was it sleeping before or stunned? Shit, Jay thought, glancing at the root again. It only took a few seconds for Jay to realize, or at least guess. Fuck, was the white fluid was keeping it suppressed. What kind of fucked up experiment is this? Suddenly, the ground tremored again and cracked around the head as it rose slightly. What did the skeletons do? He shook his head in disbelief. He wasn't ready to fight a giant. Jay glanced at the exit to the room. A river of knights still flowed from it, charging over other corpses of their own kin. There was no way he was getting through. Think. He told himself, the root carries brown-gray liquid now. I thought the white stuff was being fed to it, but could it be that it kept it suppressed? The brown liquid, if this was my experiment, I would put in a failsafe. Poison. I can only hope they did. He thought, placing a great deal of trust in his skeletons. Suddenly, the portal shimmered. Jay's eyes widened, and he stifled a smile as Red gave him some hope. Red came through, standing on the root. It was still holding the pendant Jay gave to it. Yet instead of helping to fight the knights off, Red did the unexpected. Red glanced towards the head and readied its sword, then suddenly began an all-out sprint along the route. The head continued to rise as the ground quaked and cracked. Jay was on the edge of the room, so he was safe from the fissures that opened, unlike a large amount of the knights. Suddenly, the lesser knights charged at the head. What the fuck is happening? Jay watched on in horror as most of them marched to their deaths. Many of them fell into the crevices and fissures that opened or became paste, as the tentacles slammed down on them. Meanwhile, Red sprinted along the route. Jay didn't understand why, but he trusted Red, and had probably learned something from the other side of the portal. The tentacles on the far side of the head disappeared, sinking into the ground. But only for a moment. They all rose again, having merged together. It's a fucking hand. The hand had 3 fingers and 1 thumb, made mostly of the fleshy roots. It appeared slender and weak at first, but as the head woke up, more of the living roots came to reinforce it, giving it more strength. Instead of attacking the knights of Red, it reached for the root that was carrying the milky sap towards it, and it weakly grasped it with its weakened grip. For now, it could only squeeze it gently. Blue, Sweeper, move onto the root and help me up, Jay ordered. The skeletons suddenly jumped up onto the large root, and together, in one quick movement, they pulled Jay up. The giant hand gently squeezed the root, but as it got stronger, the root narrowed in its grip. The head continued to rise, and soon 2 giant mounds appeared, its shoulders. Move. Jay ordered, sending Blue and Sweeper chasing after Red while he followed as quickly as he could. Jay went much slower than the nimble skeletons as the root rolled and swayed. The head lifted it up higher in its grip, and Jay noticed the root attached to its throat. The giant hand was getting stronger, twisting and pulling the root, trying to rip it out of its throat. Jay clambered along the shifting root. At different points stabbed his sword and necrotic gauntlet into it to stop himself from falling off. Glancing up, Red finally made it to the giant's hand, wrapped around the root. Without hesitation, Red began slashing and stabbing at the hand, trying to weaken it as much as it could. Help Red, he ordered Blue and Sweeper. Dune. Suddenly, the head pulled back, sending a shockwave through the root coming from its throat. Blue and Red held on, but Sweeper fell. It landed safely, not taking much fall damage, but the giant root they were all standing on shifted back and crushed it completely. Your skeleton has died. Glancing down as he held on, Jay saw a startling difference in the fluid below. Previously, it was slowly turning from white to gray, but now the gray color of the liquid had another liquid behind it, which was pitch black. It was like a wall of the black fluid moved along, and had just made it under Jay. He knowingly nodded. It was obvious what it meant for the head. This needs to reach its throat before it can sever the root. Glancing back, Jay regretted cutting the root open. The hole have slowed the fluid down. Some of the black fluid leaked out, and the ova instantly died, shriveling into nothing but bones and body parts. While the knights now advanced on the giant head, they were still coming after Jay, filled with a furious wrath. Many recklessly clung to the swaying root, attempting to climb up. Chapter 297. Final Push. The giant raised the root higher, making the black fluid slow down. Target the hand at the wrist, Jay commanded. Blue and Red hacked away with their swords, but smaller growths sprung out of the giant's hand, smaller snake-like vines. They had no poison, but tried to grasp and entangle the swords along with the skeletons, protecting the hand. The skeletons had to slash them away and sever them before they could weaken the hand any further. Jay ran, crawled and climbed along the root as it changed positions and twisted in the giant's grip. The closer the black liquid came, the more it moved. Piercing his gauntlet's claws into the root, he had a moment to think as he waited for it to settle. It's panicking, I think. Didn't it expect this, though? Didn't it think someone would come to end the experiment someday? He wondered, thinking it should face its death with fury rather than fear. Perhaps fear is all it knows. Jay glanced at the army of knights below. A thought passed through Jay's mind. It's scared. Do the innocent fear death? But who is innocent? Who could be innocent here? Finally, it stopped shaking for a moment, and Jay ran along the root, finally making it to the hand. He slashed away some of the writhing vines. He wanted to test it. Pulling out the red needle, he plunged it into the giant's hand. A light of hope blazed in Jay's heart as he pricked it, but it was quickly extinguished. The needle turned red again. Tainted. Ah, fuck this. What's the damn point? Jay thoughtlessly tossed it away, and it disappeared into the floor fissures below. Everything's tainted. Why give me a damn magic needle when the result is always the same? Frustrated, Jay started hacking away at the hand, and together with Blue, they weakened it. It still squeezed the root, but it did not cut the flow off. If anything, its grip loosened slightly. More of the giant plant's body left the earth, though it couldn't raise its other hand, as it was being harassed by an army of knights. Alone, they would have been nothing more than ants, but together, their damage added up and it couldn't ignore it. Finally, the black fluid made it to them, passing underneath and through the giant's grip. Suddenly, the giant moved his hand back, closer to its neck. As soon as he saw its hand opening, Jay dug his gauntlet claws into the root and barely held on. Blue stumbled forwards and was about to slip off. Jay reached out to grab it, his fingers only touching the bottom of its foot, but wasn't close enough. Blue tumbled off the root, falling out of sight. As for Red, it disappeared too. Damn it. Jay frowned. The root settled down again as the giant tightened its grip further up, squeezing and twisting again. Jay moved up the root as quickly as he could, sprinting uphill at some points, and barely holding on at others. More of the giant's plant flesh body left the earth as it pulled more of itself out, and Jay wondered how big it was before it consumed most of the dungeon's resources. But I guess it doesn't matter now, he thought, finally getting close to the giant's hand again. Jay pulled his sword down, carving into his fingers. Thankfully, they were not as thick as the tentacles, as most of the roots from the 4 tentacles went to forming its arm instead. Below him, the roots covering the floor moved, pulling up towards the giant like a carpet. Along with it went the ova, entangled knights in dead suits of armor. However, this doesn't deter the knights in the slightest. With the floor clear of roots, they could rush into death even faster. Meanwhile, the black fluid moved closer to the giant's throat. It seemed to struggle against this unwanted implant, trying to rip it out of its own throat. The root seemed to pump itself, and Jay guessed that either the giant didn't control it, or someone put it there. Meanwhile, Jay was in a precarious situation. To stop himself from falling, he had dug his gauntlet deeply into the root, while continuing to slash at the giant's hand, doing as much damage as safely as he could, so not a lot. And without Blue to help, the hand was getting stronger. At this moment, Jay was glad he didn't get the skeletons to cut all the way through the black liquid carrying root. In fact, he regretted it as he guessed that this carnivorous giant would be dead by now, as much of the pressure pushing the black fluid was being lost because of the hole they made. Being closer to the body, Jay thought he could even hear his heartbeat, though the head was no longer pumping its forehead. Somewhere inside its body, its heart had started, or whatever this thing had for a heart. While the giant's hand was gradually gaining strength again, the black fluid moved right under Jay once more. It wasn't yet strong enough. Finally, it dropped the root again and moved its hand closer to its neck, which is where the root entered its body. Almost dead, Jay thought. Yet as he watched the black liquid under him and saw how quickly it was slowing down, he realized he had to do more damage. Each time the giant moved out of the ground, it got higher, which made it harder for the root to pump. Jay stored his sword into his inventory and sprinted along the root, occasionally letting himself fall forward, to grasp at the root, and to find whatever grip or balance he could. Yet, while advancing, he was calculating. The giant was rising, the hand got stronger, and the black fluid was slowing down. It's not enough, I need to try something else, Jay thought. Looking ahead, he saw the giant's eyes. They were staring, locked onto the black liquid coming up to it. Perhaps it was the only thing it feared. Jay climbed upwards as fast as he could, coming close enough to launch an unstable tooth at its eyes. The weak spot of nearly every creature. If I land this, it'll probably burst its eye open and hopefully loosen its grip, sealing its own fate. Jay quickly charged a tooth until it hovered and hummed with energy. Boom. He cast it towards one of its eyes. It was accurate, but it didn't reach its target. A slender vine from its hand suddenly lashed out and intercepted the spell. The spell tore the vine to pieces, and it dropped away, but the eyes were fine. NEO Rapture marked the initial hosting of this chapter on NEO Circumflex v Euros LSZN. Jay grit his teeth, knowing what he had to do. He quickly climbed upwards, getting back to the giant hand holding to root. It covered itself in smaller vines, all trying to stop him from getting a decent sword strike in. It was probably what it was doing with the knights below, too. Jay, being more agile than the knights, easily cut them away with his sword and climbed onto the hand itself. The hand was no longer his target, it was merely a barrier. Just a little closer. He grit his teeth, moving his hands and legs as fast as they would move. He needed to climb past before more of the vines sprang up and trapped him. As he tried to climb onto the chin of the giant, it finally noticed him. Many smaller vines appeared from the hand and tried to ensnare him. His sword made quick work of them, but one of them made it, wrapping around his leg and pulling him back. The helmet launched a necrotic bolt, perhaps testing the enemy, though it had no effect. Jay held on with his gauntlet, but he couldn't reach the vine around his ankle with his sword. Fuck, just a little more. He glanced at the giant's eyes. More of the slender vines had sprung up to protect them. Behind Jay, more vines coiled around the one pulling on Jay's leg, reinforcing it. As it got stronger, he couldn't resist it. It pulled him back, even with his gauntlet's claws dug into the giant's neck. Deep gashes formed. He curled his body and slashed his sword again, landing on the vines, but it wasn't enough. More vines came to grasp him and crawled up, tightening around his leg. The plant was going to strangle him. Boom. An unstable tooth found its way into the swarm of vines and exploded, sending them all into writhing pieces. He damaged the vine around his leg, but it still weakly clung to him. Shring. He weakened it enough to cut through cleanly. Jay immediately stored his sword and climbed as quickly as he could. The giant couldn't stop him. If it removed its hand from the root, the black liquid would enter its throat. As for its other hand, it was in the tentacle form, trying to hold off the army of knights below. Yet its second hand would not do much. It was in tatters and weakened. Each time it slammed its tentacles into the ground, it took handfuls of knights with it, but as it lay on the ground after its attacks, it was vulnerable, and the knights gave it no mercy. As Jay climbed, some smaller vines found their way through cracks in the giant's head, but he easily cut them down. Jay made it to the chin. He was about to charge an unstable tooth spell, but more of the slender vines had appeared, making it impossible for the spell to reach the eye. Fuck. I need to get closer. Each time a vine appeared, he planted his gauntlet into the head's flesh, and with his free hand, cut it down. Sweat covered his face, and his fingers burned with pain. After fighting the knights for what felt like hours, and then clawing his way up the giant's shaking root, he felt like he had nothing left to give. Yet he moved every limb with focus and sheer will. While painful, he was making progress towards its eyes. Glancing back, he saw the giant's hand gathering more strength, squeezing and twisting harder. Good thing I got off when I did, Jay thought, doubting he could climb it. The black fluid slowed to a crawling pace. The cut that the skeletons made looked like it was tearing wider as more of the black liquid pulled on the chamber floor. It almost made him want to give in to the exhaustion. Come on, he told himself. I've come too far to give in now. I have more strength than this. He climbed further, finding whatever strength he could. His hands felt like they would tear apart, and as sweat ran into his eyes, Jay wanted to give up. However, he soon heard something behind him. The sounds of roots being hacked away. Glancing down, he saw one of his skeletons. Blue. Jay whispered in disbelief. Seeing an ally amid battle could raise any heart, especially one of his loyal minions. Blue had not fallen off of the giant's swinging root, but it clung on underneath. All this time, it had been pushing its bones to the brink of snapping, fighting off vines while hanging upside down. Against all odds, it made its way back to help his master. Unrelenting and unforgiving. It had not given up. Blue did everything in its power, using all the strength it could find in its ancient bones to get back and fight. Jay grit his teeth, finding anger and strength. I'm his master, I should set the example. What am I doing? There's no giving up. I still have muscles to move, they aren't torn apart. My bones aren't broken and my blood still boils. Even the giant fights on despite being so broken. Where is my excuse to quit? He spat. Jay ignored the pain and climbed faster, ripping into the giant's plant flesh with his fingers, pulling chunks out in a resolute rage. He even ripped vines to pieces with his gauntlet, instead of slicing them apart. Getting to the eye, he finally pulled his sword. Vines came from around it like eyelashes and covered it in a tangled web. A few swings and multiple vines were severed, but regenerated quickly. It wasn't enough. Jay stabbed his sword down, and the vines barely held it. More, he yelled. He stamped his boots on the vines covering the eye, letting them grab his feet. The foolish things didn't realize they were helping to anchor him in place. Jay no longer needed to hold on with one hand. With both hands, he gripped his sword and thrust, again and again. In a blind, exhausted rage, he stabbed it mercilessly as if he hated it. He was like a maniac trying to kill a corpse that kept coming back, giving it everything he had. Its green blood covered his face. Yet the vines gave no ground to the sword, and they swallowed Jay up to his knees. His whole body flexed with one final push. He sunk all his weight into the sword. Just fucking die. Jay yelled through a clenched jaw, spit forced out and flying through his teeth. The sword pierced deeper than it ever had. The whole blade turned green with blood. Jay had given this last thrust everything. It was the last of his energy. He made a narrow hole in the vines, a skinny shaft with his sword, but the eye was still unharmed, unblemished and uncut. It wasn't enough. Jay huffed from exhaustion. Holding onto his sword with both hands, he rested his head against the pommel. Sweat mixed with blood and dripped onto the vines. He panted with his mouth open, dripping saliva from his lips. He glanced down, lazily keeping his eyelids half open. Your sword is being swallowed up. There is no one to help you, he whispered to himself. His eyes became watery. I guess this is all I have. Chapter 298. Death Time. Jay closed his eyes and breathed in the cold air. His hands dropped to the side, and the living vines began creeping up his arms, pulling him deeper. His energy dropped to zero and his whole body felt heavy, as if he was in thick chains. Relaxing now was too tempting to resist, if even for a moment. Yet as he sat there, without backup or help, his thoughts drifted to the darker places. There's no one to help me. No one who understands me. I'm so tired. Who would know if I disappear? Who would care? Jay asked himself, but he already knew the answer. Dad left, I raised myself. Everyone else had a head start, but they still turned and pushed me down as if I was one of them. The guild used me. Anya escaped Laszlo without me. They left me to die in the wilderness or by the hands of the mage hunters. Now the only ones looking for me are my enemies. Fools. After a moment, his breathing slowed down, his sweat felt cold. They think I'm here to be used and discarded. Did they think I would allow it? Anger, disdain, and bitter disgust showed on Jay's face. Yet he was not angry with anyone, but with himself. Pathetic. Jay talked to himself. You said you were more than this, or was it just a lie? Where is your drive? Where is your ambition? Did you do this all for others in the first place? And if they only care when you're soaring high among the clouds, they truly don't care at all. Jay spat. No. I don't move for others, I move for myself. I care for myself because no one else does. He thought, feeling his strength return. Others will tear me down as soon as I raise my head, but I don't become stronger for them, he nodded. I act because of who I am, and it's better having no one around me. There is no one to question my will or my motives. I don't have an annoying person second-guessing everything I do. No one to disdain my weakness, no one to shame my strength. While I am ensnared in these vines, I am truly free. CLING. A noise found its way to Jay's ears. The sounds of a slashing sword and bones. Blue was still fighting somewhere behind. I guess not everyone has given up on me. Jay opened his eyes, and in them was a fierce determination. It covered his arms up to the elbow with the living roots as they pulled him into them, but he didn't panic. Instead, a sly smile appeared on his face. I guess the gentle approach was all it took. He felt his hands free from vines on the other side, and in both of them an unstable tooth spell appeared. Both of them were already humming, about to explode from all the mana he was pushing into them. Jay felt Blue draw closer. It wasn't slashing the giant's hand, but was forging a path towards its master. The vines made it to Jay's neck, threatening to strangle him. But it was too late. Yay boom. At point-blank range, both of the spells exploded into his right eye. The giant shuddered, his head reeled back in staggering pain. The vines held firmly Jay in place, entangled in them. Yet Jay wasn't done. Boom. Another explosion caused the giant to shudder with pain. Its large hand appeared, bashing against Jay's back. In a painful panic, the giant smashed his hand into his own head, right onto Jay's back. Rah. Jay's face smashed into the vines, breaking his jaw and nose. Blood and teeth fell from his mouth. It broke his spine too. He couldn't move. 91 damage. For now, all he could do was endure the pain. Thankfully, he invested a lot of points into his vitality stat, so his body healed quickly as his health points drained. He tried to brace for another blow from the hand, but thankfully, there was none. In a few moments, his body healed and the giant hand had moved back to clasping the root, trying to stop the black fluid. After regaining his senses, he tried another tactic. The giant can probably heal quickly, too. He thought, imagining the destruction he caused in its eye socket. I suppose I'll just have to block its healing. Suddenly, a green glow of necrotic mana came from gaps in the vines below him. The vines entangling Jay suddenly bulged. He was releasing a mountain-sized pile of bones right into the giant's eye socket. In seconds, his head began reeling back and shaking from the pain again, while the pressure of the bones crushed Jay's unarmored hand on the other side of the vines. Yet he didn't care. It was a price he would gladly pay. Grah. More. More. Jay grit his teeth and smiled like a maniac as blood flowed from his mouth, knowing that the pain he was feeling was nothing compared to what the giant was going through. The head began to spasm backwards and forwards. The whole dungeon trembled from its shuddering body. Its hand released the root around its neck, but it was in so much pain that it couldn't even bring it to smash against Jay again. It trembled more, convulsing violently. They caught Jay in his vines, and he couldn't escape. The powerful shudders were almost making him pass out. Cytokine stabilization activated. Suddenly, his head felt lighter, and he no longer felt the changes in gravity, pushing his head from side to side. His brain felt relaxed. So that's what it does. Good. He thought, no longer feeling like his brain was turning to mush. However, it only applied to his head. He felt like his shoulders were about to be dislocated. Even the vines holding him were having a hard time keeping him trapped. Somewhere behind him, Blue held on, though Jay wasn't sure how. He wasn't sure anything could have. Thankfully, its shaking was slowing down, and suddenly it stopped. The vines holding Jay suddenly loosened as he felt like his whole body was in free fall. The entire giant was toppling over. Everything started to wither and die. Boom. The giant's body hit the ground as it died, sending shock waves throughout the whole dungeon. 21,900 x. Jay's body hung in the dead vines. Not wanting to lose any of his bones, he added them bones back to his gauntlet. His other hand healed, no longer crushed by the bones inside the giant's head. While the exp notification was enormous, he felt like it wasn't enough to make up for what he went through, and he just wanted to leave this place. Now is the dungeon over? He thought, relaxing in the vines for a moment. The initial instance of this chapter being available happened at N0v3 Elbin. The sounds of night still sounded in his ears. They still thoughtlessly slashed at the giant's corpse. Suddenly, Blue began cutting away at the vines around its eye, trying to free its master. Jay simply waited, though he was annoyed. Come on. The plant giant is dead. Surely this dungeon is over. Maybe it just needs a second. Jay wondered, frowning as he heard knights getting closer. Chapter 299. Mostly safe. Blue hastily cut Jay out of the dying roots. It was a simple task when they didn't grow back between each chop. Jay stood up on the giant's head, glancing at the army of knights below. Now what, he wondered. The knights were still hacking away at the giant's corpse, spilling its green blood everywhere. One knight noticed Jay, then a few of them, then many more. They climbed the giant's body towards him and his skeleton. It didn't take long, and most of the knights stopped attacking, realizing the giant was dead, while the source of their vengeance stood atop its corpse. Jay wasted no time looking around for exits, but nothing had changed. Knights still blocked the passageway to the stairs, and the portal would not let him through. The only difference was that there wasn't a storm of knights running overhead. Looking up to the observation deck above, Jay doubted he could make it that high, even with a mountain of bones in his gauntlet. The giant's holding room was simply too big. Below him, there were great fissures cracked open by the giant, which would swallow many bones. There were only dead knights filling them, and it wasn't a viable escape route either. Nowhere to go. It looks like we'll just have to stay then, Jay thought. Glancing back down into the giant's eye, there was a large opening on the inside. Because of the bones he had pumped into it, a cavity opened up inside its head. It was like a cave with one way in through the eye. Defensible and disgusting. Jay pursed his lips, shaking his head. Without a second thought, he jumped into the eye hole he just escaped from. The damage the bones had caused was devastating. Many cuts and impacted, squished wounds with burst blubbery plant flesh was everywhere. He landed in a pool of his green blood, which went up to his knees. It was warm and humid inside the head, and its only redeeming quality was that it still had the fresh smell of a forest on an early morning. Alright, I better fix this place up a bit before the knights get here, Jay thought. Releasing some bones from his gauntlet, he dropped enough to make a platform to stand on, above the pool of green blood. Jay quickly summoned Sweeper and let it craft its own sword before. After it made another two-hander sword, Jay sent it onto the giant's face to give Blue some backup. Now where is Red? Jay wondered, thinking if he should re-summon it or not. He could still sense it somewhere nearby. It was still alive, but the black fluid was interfering with his necrotic senses. CLING. The skeletons fought above as a knight engaged them, and Jay hastily got to work on his first set of defensive fortifications. Jay had just leveled up, and with mana regeneration and a larger mana pool, he wasn't cautious about using his mana. First, he spread a flat plane of mana over the platform he was standing on, fusing the bones together, and giving himself a more sturdy foundation. Next, he made the necrotic gauntlet release skulls and femur bones, and caused them to swirl around in a cylinder shape, forming a pillar of skulls. As the pillar formed, he coated it with mana, binding it together. He arranged each of the skulls facing outwards in rings, but Jay didn't have time to admire his work. 230 exp. Another knight died above, and the skeletons began fighting more and more enemies. He fixed the pillar on the platform, melding it into it with more necrotic mana. After crafting a second pillar, they each reached up to opposite sides of the eye hole. Checking that the skull pillars were sturdy enough, he formed a skeletal beam from many straight bones, attaching it between the pillars. The giant's eye socket now had a skeletal beam going across it with 2 gaps on either side. The gaps were wide enough for the skeletons to pass through, but too narrow for the armored knights to cross. 115 X. Jay added more bones to help reinforce the skeletal beam before working on the next part of his defenses. The next part was simple. It was another bone platform, only higher up. The first platform was to get his feet out of the green blood, but this one was to help him and his skeletons to reach the opening, in order to fight back any knights trying to get in. It was a simple process to make a raised platform of bones, and Jay topped it off with the flat rectangular bone he had previously melted into a sleeping spot. Looks good, Jay thought, and then began crafting spears. Before calling the skeletons inside, he crafted 6 spears. On the bone platform, he added special grooves for them to slot into. Blue, Sweeper, come inside and set up these spears, Jay ordered, then crafted more of the spears. The more, the better, he thought. Each spear could stop 110 pounds, 50 kilograms, of force. While 3 for each side of the beam were enough for one night, Jay knew he had to craft many more. The skeletons jumped in, nimbly slipping past the beam between the eyes. A knight followed, but its chest armor struck against the beam and caught itself there. Jay smiled, seeing that the beam and his skull pillars held their place. Hurry and kill it so we can get more of these spears into place, Jay ordered, forming another long spear shaft within the green mana cloud before him. The skeletons stabbed the stuck knight with the spears, easily killing it. 115 X. Its body hung there, blocking one of the 2 gaps. Damn, oh well, Jay shrugged. The skeletons propped more of the spears up, pointing them up into the eye socket. Jay propped one up and added some mana to the base, fixing it into place on the bone platform. The skeletons copied him and released some necrotic mana, too. They pierced a few of the spears into the dead knight too, but it was more of a precaution to help hold its weight up, in the event that other knights came and piled on top of it. Now I'm mostly safe. I guess we kill them one by one until they're all dead, or until I figure something else out, Jay thought, as his stomach growled in hunger. Without a frown, he crunched down some leftover nuts and some bone tussle root he had been carrying, keeping his hunger at bay. Maybe the knights aren't the biggest threat anymore. Perhaps my hunger will consume me. Why isn't this damn thing over? Are the innocents saved now? The knights will have no food without the plant, and no new soldiers either. The roots on the surface will wither and die too. I killed the cannibal village. Yet I still haven't found a single untainted. Chapter 300. Death Pit. Guided by the intelligent knights, the remaining army of knights assembled and marched against Jay, who was completing his defenses inside the giant's head. They climbed the giant and swarmed like ants that found an intruder in their nest. They met the first group of them that tried to jump into the skeletal bunker, with a bouquet of spears poking out. They died as quickly as they came. 575 X. Because of the bone beam going across the eye, none of them could break through. Their dead bodies became stuck and pierced with spears, and had to be pulled out before another knight could try. For now, Jay's position was secure. Seeing that the plan to kill the intruder wasn't working, the lesser knights attacked the head, hacking away with their swords. Some tried to make new holes in the head, but most focused their swords around the eye, trying to make a larger opening, and it didn't take long for the first knight to slip past the beam. Of course, it died instantly. Its body pierced by more spears, but another one jumped through straight after, pushing spears to the side. They already hacked apart the longer spears which were pointing out of the eye hole and pulled them out. The knights no longer had to remove the corpses either, and the number coming inside increased, along with the weight on top of the spears. Damn. It's only a matter of time before this head fills with their bodies and I'm forced out, Jay thought. Jay glanced around the cavity inside the giant's head, trying to guess how much time he had. As he looked at the lower platform he made, he noticed something wasn't right. The blood level, is it rising? He wondered. 115 X. The knights were relentless and continued to cut open a larger hole while more jumped through. The bone platform began to creak and groan from all the weight. Clang. The knight suddenly jumped down near Sweeper. Instead of attacking the skeleton, it turned its sword against the forest of spears. Crack. It cracked one in half, snapping it, and before Sweeper could guide its sword into its spine, the knight cleaved another, bringing a dead body falling down with it, making a larger gap in the vertical spear wall. Fuck. Jay quickly replaced one of the broken spears while Sweeper stood guard. Blue weaved through the spears and pushed the knight's body off the bone platform. Splash. The knight's body splashed into the green blood below. Shit. It's getting higher, but why? The giant is dead, Jay thought. Glancing down, he noticed another change. The green blood was turning darker. It's still pumping, Jay thought. Outside, the root entering the giant's throat which pumped the black fluid was still active. As Jay guessed, it wasn't a part of the giant. The blood was turning darker and darker as it rose higher and higher, and brought Jay another problem. I need to escape before I drown, he thought. The lower platform of bone already had the rising blood beginning to cover it. Meanwhile, the knights made a larger hole and flooded into the head, while Jay started making a ramp going upwards. Cring. The skeletons became engaged in a struggle. Blue focused on defending Jay, while Sweeper tried to protect the spears from being cut down. Yet it was all breaking down, turning to a mess of broken bones and a cesspool of dark blood. Jay's bone ramp was only partially complete, and he had to pause as a knight jumped down right in front of him. I haven't got time for this, he casually said, bringing his hand forward. Boom. An unstable tooth exploded at point-blank range. The blast knocked the knight away, giving Jay a few precious moments to build his ramp higher. The knight fell near Blue, who finished it knight off and moved back to defending Jay. Crack. The initial posting of this chapter occurred via Novelbin. Under the weight of the knights, the first spear snapped. There was too much weight. Above them, a canopy of steel and dead bodies had formed. Jay wasn't worried, though. It surprised him that the spears had held on this long. Jay continued to build his ramp and was getting closer to the ceiling. He could almost touch the fleshy roof. Of course, he wouldn't willingly touch it. He made the ramp to wrap around the side of one of the bone pillars, just under the edge of the eye. He watched as more knights swarmed through the hole, falling to their deaths on the spears or into the growing pool of black blood below. For a few moments, all Jay did was watch, waiting for the perfect moment. Blue, Sweeper, get ready, he commanded. Blue and Sweeper rushed behind him, all three of them standing on the skeletal ramp he hastily constructed. Jay's plan was to escape this death trap before the knights blocked the exit. He would not drown in giant blood, dead knights and black fluid. Fighting to his last breath and wisp of mana was the preferable way to go. Let nothing attack me, Jay ordered, beginning his escape plan. He closed his eyes as necrotic mana gathered in his palms. In each of his hands, 3 unstable teeth hovered. He filled them each with mana, focusing on the ones with the least amount, so he wouldn't overload any. Each of them slowly began to hum and shake with the undead energy, yet one of them had glowing cracks appear on its surface. He added a little too much. A single wrong move, a single imbalance, and all 6 would blow up in Jay's face. Just a little more. Jay flexed the muscles in his hands, as he tried to hold on to the 6 spells, keeping them under control. Suddenly, another knight fell past, causing a gentle breath of air to touch his face. Now. Jay suddenly opened his eyes. Each of them were filled with necrotic mana, and glowed with death. He looked like an undead lick. The 6 spells shot out of his hand, escaping between the knights jumping in. Boom. 920, X. Decimation. Shattered armor and shrapnel. Bodies turned to mist. The first exploded, causing all others to burst just above the hole. After releasing the spell, Jay had turned his head and blocked his ears, but even after that, all he could hear was a loud ringing noise. They sent the knights flying. Many instantly died, turning into giant metal suits of shrapnel, and pushing other knights down. For a moment, the head was clear of enemies. The skeletons jumped out first, standing in a green mist and raising their swords in defense. Jay aimed himself at the eye hole which he had just blown open. Iskian. With a bump of air, he easily cleared the hole and exited. Turning back, he reached his gauntlet down, quickly storing all the bones from the cavity inside the giant's head. The mass of dead bodies splashed into the pool of blood below as the spears, platforms, and pillars disappeared. Jay checked around, surveying the damage he caused. The giant's nose was gone, and the spell had stripped away most of the upper layers of flesh. Around the room, he was looking for escape options, or at the very least somewhere to flee to. Suddenly, he saw it again. It had climbed up onto the root, successfully escaping the knights with one of their own swords. Red. Just where are you going? He whispered to himself. Red, instead of running toward him, headed back along the route and jumped into the portal. What the fuck, Red? Jay thought, feeling confused and admittedly, slightly abandoned. Whatever was on the other side of the portal was presumably more important than protecting his master. With nowhere else to go, Jay ran back towards the portal too, jumping onto the giant root coming from the giant's throat. At this moment, it was still pumping the black fluid, kept alive by whatever was on the other side of the portal. Meanwhile, the knights recovered from the shock and began climbing towards Jay, who had only just made it onto the root. Fuck, what are you doing, Red? Where are my damn skeletons, he thought, bolting towards the silvery portal.